Hey, welcome to the Midweek Podcast, where we are equipping you to lead your everyday people to new life and new possibilities. And today on the podcast, I am joined by Pastor Tim, who most of you know, and also Gabe Caudill is joining us on the podcast today. So Gabe, I know that people see you up on stage playing literally every instrument up there, basically, but why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself for those who don't know you?
Well, I'm 6 foot tall. My blood type.
Really? Is it 5'11" and 3/4
No,
like
I'm
me?
I'm actually 6 foot tall.
5'11" and 3/4.
Yeah, there you go. No, so I guess your question is, why do you have me here today to speak on this topic of science and Christianity and how we can trust science? And so I guess I'll start in college. 3 years when I started in college, I was a chemistry major. And then I was sitting in a lab one day and I finally decided I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. It was actually quite boring. And so I switched into education. I became a science teacher and I taught, 7 through 12 science, and engineering, for about 5 years. Got my master's, went through the whole college program and learning more about the education system and everything else. And so now I'm working as an instructional designer.
Excellent. Well, as Gabe kind of previewed for us, today we are going to talk about really, I think it's a hot topic being thrown around by many in the media and in politics. And there are many secular voices who are kind of repeating the same talking point or buzz phrase. They say, I trust or I believe in science, which of course sounds like a great statement, a great declaration. But as at the same time they make that declaration, it's also an accusation, because when they say I trust or I believe in science, what they're suggesting is that many, and particularly those with a kind of religious leaning or bent, do not. They do not believe in science. And, this isn't a new argument. As I was kind of preparing for today, I came across a couple different works. William Draper introduced this idea of warfare between religion and science in his book, The History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science, published in 1874. That was quite a while ago, boys. And then 20 years later, Andrew Dixon White ran with that idea in his 2-volume study, The History of Warfare of Science. And he kind of singled out with theology in Christendom. And so the question that I want to pose to both of you today is this. As Christians, are we at war with science? Or maybe put a little bit more simply, as a Christian, as Tim, a pastor, or Gabe, someone who's heavily involved in the church, do you believe in science? Tim, why don't you take this one first?
Well, it's interesting that you would ask me that as I scroll down my notes in Google Docs and turn off my phone so it's silent during this. And also, we're making a podcast that is going to go to every person who has an internet connection across the entire world if I actually believe in science, because that is what we're doing right now. We have this idea that Christians don't believe in science has really started, I think, with evolution. 15, 20 years ago, it started to come out. I believe in the science, or I believe in the science of evolution is what they were talking about. But now it's kind of capitulated into a demeaning way that I can refer to my opponent. I believe in science and you don't. Right. What I'm saying is I don't know what the science is either, but I believe in it and you don't.
So definitely there's a drawing of the line in the sand going.
Yeah, and I think it started with evolution. I believe in the science. And as you know, in the last 10 to 20 years, incrementally, the science of evolution is being disproven over and over again. Matter of fact, believe it or not, one of my favorite authors, Richard Dawkins, I read his stuff. I had an atheist friend who he said, you read my book, I'll read your book. So we kind of did that. We worked on midnights together. And interestingly enough, even Richard Dawkins said that aliens probably seeded the planet. Because of the Cambrian explosion, and nobody really has a good answer for that.
For a scientist who probably, I'm assuming, claims not to believe in things of faith, a faith nature, to just be like, the best solution I have is there's probably aliens out there somewhere who seeded us.
Yeah.
That seems like a big leap of faith for someone like me.
And of course, that starts the next discussion. What alien was that? Right. You know, and we kind of have an idea of who we think that might have been. And so as we talk about science and faith, we got to understand that there's they kind of cross paths. How can we be at war with science, especially since a lot of the founders of science were Christian men?
Yeah, and I know, Gabe, when you and I were talking, you had kind of mentioned that idea of how science and religion, Christianity are often intertwined. And so why don't you kind of explain what you were driving at with that? How are those things, as we define religion, as we define Christianity, as we define science, where do you see those connections?
Yeah, well, one of the first things you have to realize is that before it was defined, people were practicing science every day and how they would, grow crops. How they would get water. I mean, all of these things, just your general processes you go through every day, you're following, the scientific method. I think people don't necessarily even realize it, but when you think it through, like when your Wi-Fi is not working, you're going to go through a process of discovery to determine why that's not working. Okay, let me turn off my Wi-Fi and turn it back on my phone. Is it just my phone? Okay, no, I've eliminated that variable. You're going through a scientific process. So people from the beginning of time have been doing that. But then when it comes to actually discovering, God created this earth and he created it full of wonder and mystery. And I mean, just look at what there is and look at how many new discoveries are happening every day. When you think like, how many more animals could we possibly discover? And then like, oh, we found 500,000 in this cave in Chile.
Right.
So, and we're how far, advanced in technology. So, and then, so the war against, science and because of Christians, or the war against Christians because of science is kind of only made up by a few loud voices shouting. And so the point being, if you look at the history, a lot of people say that like the start of the father of science, Aristotle, he's one of the founding members of everyone is like Aristotle. Everyone quotes Aristotle to this day, and he was a man of faith. Yeah. And then you have even some of the biggest scientific minds. If you think of some of the smartest people of all time in even closer to current day, like Einstein, and you go, well, his theories are still being proven. They just discovered and have the first actual picture of a black hole like a year ago. It actually happened and validating a lot of his claims. And I know that he was back in the 40s, but point being, he even didn't deny God. He wrote to a student once and she asked if he believed in God. And he said, ultimately, he didn't believe that it was a God that wanted a personal relationship with us. However, he said that the marks of intelligent design are everywhere. And this is a man who many would consider like the godfather of all science. Like he was the most advanced person in the time. And he wouldn't deny the fact that God exists.
Yeah, it makes me think of what, Paul had wrote. He said that since the beginning of time, God's invisible qualities, his power has been seen by what he's made. And so Einstein's making a claim that's really 2,000 years old. Paul said it first, is that all you have to do really is just look out at creation, all the things that God has done. And you're going to see his handprint, his fingerprints all over it. And so it's interesting to me as, we start looking at how many of these, elite scientists, leading scientists throughout the ages really were Christians, had this religious worldview. And in fact, we're probably pursuing God, not trying to disprove him, which I think a large population of, science as a topic today is really out to try to disprove it.
Well, I think that's where this idea of a war comes from. It doesn't come from Christianity. Right. Name a group of Christians that don't believe in science. You could say the Amish, but they are, go look at their solar farms and their wind farms, So it's not on the Christian side. It's like, the secular view is that Christians, don't believe in science and are dumb and are just wrapped up in faith and don't have any scientific leanings whatsoever. And I think that's a lie that's been perpetuated. But anybody with who sat down and think about it for just a second would realize that Christians are in every field, medical and scientific. And I think this idea of a war is a political statement. And it's interesting. Frank Turek, he's a apologist. He always says science doesn't say anything. Everybody's, yelling, what does the science say? What does the science say? And science doesn't say anything. It's just data. Scientists say things. And so once you throw a man in there, there's all kinds of different motivations and so forth and so on. So science is data, and men interpret that data, and some of them do not interpret it in the same way. And so we get this idea that you're on this side and I'm on that side, but my scientists say this and your scientists say that, and my scientists are smarter than yours. And so there's a lot of motivation there, political motivation. But I think when you get down to the brass tacks, faith and science walk hand in hand. They definitely can't exist without each other.
Dinesh D'Souza, in his book, What's So Great About Christianity, kind of said the same thing. He says, if you take an unbiased look at the history of science, it shows that modern science is an invention of medieval Christianity, and that the greatest breakthroughs in scientific reason have largely been the work of Christians. He even points out that even atheist scientists work with Christian assumptions that, due to their ignorance of theology and history, are invisible to them. That there is laws about creation, about nature, about the universe, that even atheist science rely on every single day to do their work, to make their hypothesis and test their experiments and their findings. And D'Souza's like, where did those laws come from? There is something out there that has created this in an intelligent way. And so there's this intelligent creator who created an intelligent planet and universe that intelligent people can discover. And even the atheists are using that underlying principle, kind of taking advantage of the fact that we have a universe that was made to be discovered, And so there is all kinds of people, and, Gabe, you pointed out earlier, some of the leading scientists who were Christians were following this. Francis Bacon, another one, they call him the inventor of invention. And, he kind of used the inductive method to record his experimental outcomes. And he argued that through the God-given power of discovery, man could fulfill the divine mandate to establish dominion over creation. And so here again is another one of these leading scientists who are just saying, man, this is a tool that as humans, we get to discover God and then to live out that command all the way back in the Garden of Eden to rule over the earth, to subdue it, to steward it. And these guys were saying, man, science is how we do that. That's how we figure these things out.
Nicholas Copernicus, back in 1543, discovered the mechanics of the solar system, that the sun and the moon didn't revolve around the earth, or the moon does, but that the earth revolved around the sun. That was a huge breakthrough, and this is what he wrote about it. This is what he said. The mechanism of the universe, wrought for us by a supremely good and orderly creator, is the system, the best and most orderly artist of all, framed for our sake. And it's amazing that how it gets twisted around, that religion is trying to prove science wrong, which is a farce, and that secularism is trying to prove religion wrong, or science is trying to prove religion wrong. The whole thing is a pursuit of God and how he designed things, and everything we find in science. I know, Gabe, you worked with some these new 3D printers, which are just fascinating. It makes a lot of my science fiction stories really come to life. But those new things is for us to say as Christians, oh, that's how God did that. And I love that idea that you mentioned, that God has made the world so that we can discover it.
Yeah. And I think just as you look throughout history, again, with that kind of unbiased eye, I'm not taking anything in this, but you would find that religious motivation has often resulted in the breakthrough discoveries that have changed the course of scientific history. People pursuing God, understanding that this is a world meant to be discovered. And so, as D'Souza says in his book, this whole war between religion and science is a fabricated thing. It's made up. Tim, like you said, name one group of Christians who don't believe in practice science on an everyday basis. We're doing it all over the world. And so our world clearly was designed for discovery. And I know that you guys have done a whole lot more research on this than I have. And I can sit around and listen to Gabe talk about this all day. And it usually just makes my head spin and I feel like I need to lie down because it's just these ideas are so beyond me at times. But there is something so unique about our planet and the human experience and life on this planet. And so, Gabe, why don't you kind of start, I guess, showing or revealing God's fingerprint in creation and why there's no way this could have happened by chance?
So here's my thought. And obviously I'm not an expert in terms of, I don't have my, I don't have anything with divinity. I'm not a scientist, practicing researcher. So take everything I say, from a perspective of just another guy. That's really important here, that I'm not a voice of certain authority on all of this sort of stuff. But when you look at everything and how it started, even from the idea of reproduction, I think you kind of touched base on this earlier, Tim, when you talked about the Cambrian explosion, but you have to have the very first thing that was created had to have the ability to reproduce. Otherwise, nothing happens, so you have this tumultuous time where, they consider when we start, and this is a whole nother topic, but you start with, the idea of the Big Bang. Here's my thought too, just as a sidebar. When God spoke, it said he spoke it into existence. That comes from a centralized point, the mouth of God. He breathed life into everything. He spoke from a single point. Why could that not have been the beginning of creation? Like, that is the beginning of creation. It science right there. You can see it. When you breathe out, you feel the air going away from you. As Ryan, you said, we were getting close to these mics. You can feel the dispersion of our voice. And you look at science and they say, we can see that the universe is expanding because of the red shift. And we see that wavelengths are getting longer. So things are turning red as they get further away. That's God's voice speaking things into existence from the beginning of time. When he spoke, time and everything began. Outside of that, God was outside of time and space. He's outside of all those principles. And I think where science kind of fails is that they say, you can't put God into a box. You can't quantify him. You can't measure him. It's not possible. So that's where scientists often run into the big hiccup of, you can't use God as an explanation because he doesn't fit into science.
Right. It kind of makes me think, if you were to look at, a narrative, a book, a novel, there is a creator of that novel and he writes this plot and there's all kinds of characters. There's things happening in that book. And as a reader, we can look at all those things and begin to pick them apart and decipher and why did they say that and what's going on in this situation? What events led to that outcome? And we could pick all that apart. But what we can't do is understand the author as part of the narrative.
Right.
He's not an episode in that novel. He stands completely on the outside of it. And I thought what you said, time began. We look back, well, what was God doing before he created? Well, again, that's a time statement. Right. And time didn't exist.
Yeah.
That statement doesn't go anywhere because there was no time until God spoke. And then there was time. Time was something God created for us as humans. We get to experience time. Before that, there wasn't any.
This is the exciting thing about that we skip over as Christians a lot. And it's the fact that, yes, we believe God spoke this, just like Gabe said, spoke it into existence, but he didn't speak it into existence and say, now you live there and I'll take care of the rest. He said, I want you to know how I did this.
That's good.
And the scripture tells us that we'll find him when we seek him with our whole heart, right? And I believe that not just for a spiritual revelation, but for a scientific one too. I think that Albert Einstein said it best when he said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. And I believe that God has put us on this planet, and one of the purposes for that is to pursue science. And I think that should be one of the number one Christian motivations in our lives, is to pursue science. And I know most people say, well, you're just leaning back on your faith. Well, my faith is science. God created. How did he create it? What's it look like? When we talk about just our world, I get so excited about this subject. We just happen to be on a little blue ball. Carl Sagan said, we're alone out here. We're just this little thing. We're not important. We're mediocre, average planet out here. Are we really? Because we just happen to be in a very flat spiral galaxy, the Milky Way, and we just happen to be between the spiral arms. If we were in a spiral arm, all we could see was dust. We could not observe the rest of the universe. We happen to be placed just in a way that we can distinguish with a telescope our galaxy and other galaxies. If we were anywhere else instead of in our galactic Goldilocks zone, we couldn't see that. And we're in a way that we can see out both different directions through the galaxy and see all the other galaxies in the universe. And it's amazing that we're right there. Well, that's the big thing. What about the small thing, like our moon? It just happens to be 400 times. The sun happens to be 400 times as big as the moon, and the sun happens to be 400 times further from the earth than the moon. So when the moon eclipses, most of our science and the understanding of the heavens and stars comes from eclipses. When the moon perfectly covers the sun, we can see the atmosphere of the sun and take all kinds of measurements when we normally can't. And that design preference is, I want them to know, I want them to search. So I'm going to give them a little help here. Now, we've got 65 major moons in our solar system, and none of them do that except for our moon. And and you can take it from there and start talking about all the different ways that science is discoverable and it's measurable. And we write down these laws of thermodynamics and physics and all these different things that we talk about when it comes to science, and we can count on them. Right, Gabe? I mean, where would we be?
Absolutely. So one of the things that, Ryan, you touched on earlier is you talked about a book with an author, and a really interesting, just a logical thought experiment here, Ryan. If I told you that you saw a book sitting on a table, you walk into a room, there's a book. It's full of letters that make up words, that make up sentences, that make up paragraphs, that make up pages. You read it and it told a story. There's no way that book would just have appeared. You would say that there was what?
Had to be an author, a writer.
Okay. So now what do we call DNA? DNA, we assign, letters, A, T, G's, right? Arranged in all of these different ways in 23 pair of chromosomes, millions of combinations, and it makes you.
Yeah.
And that book can't assemble itself, and it's written of just a bunch of letters.
Yeah, that's great. You were preaching on the image of God, and I was thinking as this was coming up, and we were going to talk about it, on how DNA is our barcode. I mean, it's who we are, and we image God because of that string of DNA that we have that's there at conception. So, man, that opens a lot of doors. I don't know how far we want to go down those ideas, but
I mean, it's just amazing to me. And, I'd love for, because I want the people listening to this podcast to walk away with something where they say, man, that answers that question that so-and-so asked me. How could this have happened? How could you say that there's a God behind this? And so I love getting to, hear both of you talk about these ideas, because it's like, it's undeniable to me when you just hear the science. I think we've been taught as believers to fear the science, because of this perceived war. But I think over and over and over again, as you actually look at the science, again, not what scientists say, but the science, the data, it just continues to prove. It's amazing to me that God speaks and the earth is expanding. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And we look at, if we were, I was watching this film, getting ready for today. I think it's as if we're 5% closer to the sun than we are right now. The temperature on Earth would be 900 degrees. Well, obviously, you want to talk about global warming, we would all be burned up and dead. And that's a 5% difference. If you scoot us back just a few percentage, we'd turn into ice. Mm-hmm. We'd freeze to death. And so you talk about that Goldilocks zone of where we're at. And then to say, we can't, Gabe, we can't throw a book on the table and have all these letters just appear on the page. If this was an accident, if this was just some random chance, well, then it should have happened more than once, right? Like we are finding and discovering more and more galaxies and planets all the time. The universe is expanding still to this day. Where is everybody? Isn't that a big question?
Well,
people should be out there.
That's the actual Enrico Fermi, an Italian scientist back in 1950. That was his paradox. He said, "Where is everybody?" And that's pretty interesting. A bunch of these scientists were at lunch and were talking. If this is true, then this is true, and they start moving down all these different assumptions about how many, and they actually put together a formula on how to prove this, in that in our galaxy alone, there should be at least 10 civilizations like ours. There should be.
And that's just, you're saying just in our galaxy,
just in our galaxy. Now, in the galaxies that we can perceive, there should be in the hundreds of thousands of civilizations. Now, when scientists talk about stuff like this, they classify it. Civilizations are class 1, 2, and 3. Class 1 is you've been able to harness the power of your planet. And that's us. We're class 1 civilization. We been able to use atomic energy and so forth and so on that we get right here on the planet. A class 2 civilization, and you've harnessed the power of your sun, your solar system. If that's a Dyson sphere or whatever that looks like in the mind of scientists who are thinking in the future. And the class 3 civilization is you've harnessed the power of your galaxy. So think about that as a civilization that just harnessed the power of the Milky Way with the hundreds and billions of stars that we have here. And the black hole that's in the middle.
We have like 400 billion is the estimate of stars in the Milky Way galaxy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So think of the power involved there. And this is how scientists think, And so in the Fermi paradox, there's just a few things that are the reason that we haven't seen anybody. Number one is we're first. Okay. We could be the first ones that have gotten this far. And there's a lot of scientists that believe that we might not be the first, but when people get to the point where they can actually transmit radio waves into space, that they are far enough along that they can also destroy themselves too. So that when you get to that point, you don't last too much longer after that because of overpopulation, global warming, wars, and so forth and so on. So that's number one, why we're not there. Number two is we're trying to talk on the telephone while they're all texting. So we're kind of missing each other with the form of technology that we're using. Number two, I think Arthur C. Clarke, I lost it here. I thought I had it here.
While you're looking that up, I can piggyback. So what's crazy is that we are listening to space. We have large array panels. I mean, like giant fields full of these panels that listen, and we pick up these blips.
SETI, yeah.
And so these little blips are, cosmic radiation. That's how we, most of the pictures you look at, if you Google a galaxy, you see these nice, beautiful colored pictures. Well, they don't actually look like that. You don't actually see them if you look. You might see like a distant piece of light. You don't see all the gas and everything around it. And that's because we use, like 5 different types of things. We use infrared, we use microwaves. We take all of those and then we paste it to basically overlay it all to look like an actual image. So you see all these beautiful pictures. You don't see it. If you actually look into space, you see black everywhere. Yeah. And what's just crazy is just in terms of, think of this. This is how if you could sum it up, Gabe, why do you, what is your biggest fascination with God and what he's created? And when I look up at night and I see stars, that's it. And it's crazy because most of those are just in our little local section of our galaxy. You're not even really seeing anything outside of your galaxy.
Right.
Again, in just our galaxy, which is 150,000 light years across. So, and that alone is mind blowing. And people are like, okay, 150,000, that's not big. But when you think of a light year and you think how far light gets in a year, here's a quick just example. One of the closest stars to us is 4.2 or 4.1 light years away. Let's talk about the Voyager spacecraft that launched in like 1971, I believe. It's right around there. It's traveling at 10.5 miles per second. At that rate of speed, we'd get here to Miami in like 2 minutes. It's already out of our little solar system.
Just crossed the heliosphere.
Yeah, it just got out of our solar system. Guess how long it would take if it kept going to get to the next closest star? And this thing's flying 10.5 miles a second.
How long is it going to take?
Anywhere between, and I've seen 2 different figures, but 45,000 to 75,000 years.
Yeah, we don't understand the bigness.
We don't get distance.
That's the next closest star.
Yeah.
The next closest thing.
It's Alpha Centauri, right?
And it's literally, and it's in the middle of nowhere. There's a really cool program called Celestia, and you can go to that star and you can just look around and there's nothing around it.
It's amazing when you talk about that. And when, one thing about these scientists like Enrico Fermi, when he's talking about this stuff, it's we live in a kind of an excellent solar system. Our star is about is in the 80th percentile of bigness, and you need a star our size. So there's only 20% of stars like that in our galaxy alone. So that then you got to have the Earth in a planet in the hospitable zone and in the Goldilocks zone for life and all that kind of stuff. So the odds are against there being another intelligent life, but they said about 10. Talked about, we're talking on the wrong frequency or we're the first. They also say there might be an intelligent life out there that's a big monster and it just eats everybody who sticks their heads up and say, hey, we're here.
It's like Galactus.
Right, Galactus. Yep. And so the other one is that they're just too intelligent and they don't care. And Arthur
we don't really care about those peons.
Arthur C. Clarke, this quote I finally found, it says, I'm sure the universe is full of intelligent life. It's just been too intelligent to come here.
It's pretty smart.
Yeah. So all those things come up. But here's the one that they talk about is that we're in a bubble. We talked about the Voyager just leaving the heliosphere, and we're actually in a bubble. We used to think that solar radiation just kind of petered out, but it pushes up against the fabric of space out there, and our solar system is in a bubble. Now, because it is, we believe that other solar systems are probably in a bubble too. And we haven't really factored that all in because we just found out about that, and I can't wait for the science to progress there. So some scientists say we're an experiment. There's a galactic being or someone from a class 3 civilization that has started us and won't let us out to the rest of the universe until they're ready to. And but you're not allowed to mention God there.
I was going to say again, this just. Does it not scream creator God? Like, we'll call it all sorts of different things just so that we can avoid saying there's probably
I
have
to go back to Arthur C. Clarke he also said any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic or spiritual power or, our God is a God of science. He created science. And the exciting thing, I think, is that he created it for us to understand it. He wants us to comprehend it and not just see it, but use it, grasp it. And he said, I'm giving you dominion. When I think about creation, you were talking about the Big Bang. We are the dust of the breath of God, as you described it. And when he created man and woman, he reached down and he grabbed the dust of the earth, which is the dust, the makings of the universe, and he created us. And I believe that that means that this universe, not just our solar system or this planet, but the universe is ours. And that excites me, that a God would go far enough to create us in such a way, in a certain position, and would grow us up to where we could discover him in science. So how can you pursue God and be at war with the way he's leading you to him?
Right. And, in my sermon this past week, I was talking about how we're created in the image of God. And I love what Paul said. He said that God has put humanity in these times, and he's defined the boundaries of nations, and he's placed us all right where we're at so that we might reach out and perhaps feel our way towards him, though he's not far from any of us. I mean, you can just see, like Paul saying, God wants to be found. And so I used that illustration of, God playing hide and go seek, but he's hides with the flashlight.
Right.
He wants to be found. And so he's given us intelligence. He's given us science, these ways to test these things and to make a hypothesis and then to test that and to have experiments and to, look through these telescopes and see what's happening in the universe. Why? So that we can discover them. If you seek me, you will find me. I think it's so encouraging because we don't need to be afraid of science. We don't have to fear this war that people tell us is out there between religion and Christianity and science, because it doesn't exist. We embrace it because it leads and it points us all the way back to our Creator. And to me, that is so exciting. And so another hot topic issue that I'd like for you guys to talk about is global warming, because, we've kind of hit on it a few times during this episode, but it's one of those things that, again, is constantly thrown back in particularly Christians' faces that you guys don't believe in global warming. And so what I would love for you guys to do is we talk about, do we believe in science? What about this topic of global warming? Is that something that is out there? Is this happening? Is it true? Should Christians embrace global warming? How much of it should they embrace? If so, what are your guys' thoughts on that?
So I guess I'll jump in. I would start by just asking the question, how did the Ice Age end? Had to warm up a little bit, right? And if basically what scientists can do is in Greenland, they're drilling out these ice cores, and they can look at the amount, and there's these pockets that are frozen inside, and they can look at the amount of carbon dioxide that is in these pockets, and you can basically tell over time based on the depth that they're at. You can predict based on the thawing and the refreezing and thawing and refreezing. And here's one of the things that is really confusing to people. But everyone kind of, I'm trying to think where I want to go with this. Science can give you a set of data that points in one direction, and that exact same science can give you a set of data that points in a different direction. So, for example, you can look at year-over-year trends that the Earth is warming up. Yes. And I don't think a lot of people's argument is with that. I think a lot of people's argument is with it's all of the extra, burning of fossil fuels, the cars that we have, the gas production, the drilling for oil, the fracking, all of this sort of stuff.
Right.
But, and so they look at that and they're saying that's contributing to global warming. I think if you literally say that global warming doesn't exist, you can't look at sheer numbers. Like that's at its evident.
The data says we're getting warmer.
Yeah. So where you're going to struggle is, okay, well, what's causing it? The people point out to the science that a volcano eruption produces more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere than cars do every X amount of years. And that's technically true. But are we adding? And then how much are we adding? Do we have enough data in order to validate that is happening? But one of the biggest things now, regardless, if we got rid of all cars, the permafrost, which is basically frozen northern lands, are thawing. And when they do, they're releasing methane and CO2 at insanely high numbers. So much so that a lot of scientists are now saying that it's kind of irreversible at this point. We could cut all of our cars and go pure electric everything and be, carbon positive, where we produce more trees and start to reverse all the sources, but it's not going to do anything. But at the same point in time, science will also show you that the refreezing of the polar caps is gaining. And you see these images from satellites and you're like, well, it's actually freezing more in the winter. But you're seeing this more extreme weather on both ends. But you can look at the data. And that's the thing is you should be a person that looks at data.
And what you said there is so important because what Frank Turk said, that science doesn't say anything, scientists do.
Right.
I saw an article on the front of Science Today, 1973, and the scientists wanted to take all the soot from our coal furnaces that were making our electricity, and they wanted to spread it on the ice caps to melt the ice because we were going to freeze over. That's what scientists read in the data in 1973. Science changes. We've seen that over and over again. Just look at these career-ending sports injuries that we see all the time. It's, well, he'll never be back. Well, there he is 2 months later. Just science begins to grow. And if global warming is an issue to where the preservation of the planet is at risk, then Christians need to be all in. I've always been a conservationist to preserve our planet. And I don't even use my lawnmower to run over a plastic bag or a letter that got out of the mailbox. I stop and I pick that up because everywhere I go, and I've done a lot of hiking in my life, and I find beer cans, and I was back in the woods one time, said nobody's ever been back here, and then I trip over a truck that's buried half in the ground, and so I hate that we're doing that to this great world that God has given us. But we can't turn our backs. Nobody can turn our backs on science, because if it's irreversible and if it's going to bring us down to the end of the world, which I don't, I have faith that the Lord will hold us together. But if that is truly going in that direction, then science is our only way out. And God has, I believe God has given us everything we need on this planet to take care of the planet and ourselves, and we need to be a people that pursue that.
Yeah, and I mean, what's the backpacker or hiker's mantra? Leave no trace, I think is how they say it. And so, as you backpack and hike in the woods, the next guy who comes and hikes behind you, the woods should feel untouched to him.
Right.
You don't want to go through and, leave your little fire pit that you set up and throw out the wrapper to, your emergency meal plan thing.
Yeah, that's why you just burn all the wrappers, right?
Yeah. Right. You burn it all. Right?
Burn it all.
And so, when we've gone backpacking together, it's like, man, you're carrying around on top of all of your gear as you hike through the week. Now you're carrying garbage around because we're going to carry all that back out with us. And it's this idea of leaving no trace. And I think as you look at that Genesis mandate, to rule over the earth, to govern it, to subdue it, to steward it, man, we do ourselves a terrible disservice when we're like, no, don't worry about that. God's going to come and he's going to make all things brand new anyways. So we don't even need to worry about this. And I don't know if Christians are actually doing that, or people just tell us that that's what we're doing. It's real easy for people to be like, no, that's who you are.
Yeah.
I don't know very many Christians doing that anyways, but that's what they say. That's kind of the messaging. But I think we do need to take that approach and say, okay, yeah, this is happening, at least in pockets. We
Right.
see the data not what scientists say, but what the data truly says is this is happening. And we need to do what we can in these areas because God has put us here to steward his planet, to steward his creation. And as you look at, Jesus' parable in the New Testament, when he gave those guys different talents, 110, 1.5, 1.2, he says, go and go do something with this. He expects us to take care of the things that he gives us.
And that's, that really plays into what are we going to do about global warming? The guy, the scientist, his name slips my mind, who really put global warming on the map.
Al Gore.
The scientist. I said the scientist. Anyways, you never hear his name mentioned anymore because he actually said 600 years, which is how long it takes for a spent uranium rod to become inert after we use it, is nothing compared to the Earth's age and so forth and so on. So he said we should go atomic energy. And we should do it right now. Everybody should go right now to atomic energy. And they're like, you're done. Okay. This is not what we want. And so the answers are so politically motivated that it's hard to get real answers. If you talk to someone about these wind farms that we have, the maintenance is astronomical to keep the wind farms going, but we got to have wind farms.
Oh, it's insane. I drove through Wisconsin and everything. I drove out to South Dakota this summer. And I'm not kidding. I was driving by all these wind farms and I just was like, I wonder how much energy they produce. Cause it was as far as the eye could see left and right, taking out 90 through, Wisconsin, Minnesota. And I looked it up. It's 2%, 2%.
Yeah.
Wow.
And look what has gone into creating that. Now they're all over the place. And then we have solar farms, which is, man, that's a great idea. But what do we do with the garbage left over? All the heavy elements that are used to make those things. And they say in Somalia that ships come by and dump that stuff right off the coast. That's so our answers are not good answers. We need better answers. We're going to need science to do that. So Gabe, let me ask you this question. I know you're the question answer. Where does science go from here from a Christian's perspective?
Well, Tim, as we spoke about earlier, I mean, science is going to continue forever, just like we will be able to as we move into heaven. And this was something interesting that you actually had mentioned is that, and I had always wondered too, what are we going to do when we're in heaven? The angels fly around and they see something new about God every time and they sing, they cry, holy, holy, holy. And I'm sitting here going like, I mean, God is amazing, but I'm going to be just there on my knees, sitting on a little cloud. I can see the golden road. And then I'm just going to see God, and that's it for all eternity.
I mean, we all have that picture of, the fat little baby in a diaper with the wings and the harp sitting on a cloud floating around.
Well, I wasn't a fat little baby. I was incredibly muscular, a little not baby.
You were, Gabe. You were.
Your baby I was doesn't there, like Oreos like mine.
Yeah, you're thinking of the Cupid baby. But no, I was, and Tim, you had mentioned that, we're going to continue, and then obviously the design and creation of a new earth. And then, we start out like that. That's our opportunity to continue to discover and explore. And oh my gosh, the idea of just being able to continue to just do research and continue to see all of the things that God has created for eternity is fascinating. I mean, think of, again, you don't even have enough in your lifetime to go look at all the places in the United States. Mm-hmm. And what are you going to be able to do with eternity? Right.
And I know we think of eternity as like the eternal vacation, I just don't think it's going to be that way. I read a lot of books, and one of the things that always intrigued me is John Ben Neumann. He talks about a probe. They believe that if there was an intelligent race out there that they should have populated the Milky Way at least 1,000 times since the beginning of the universe. How you believe those numbers is all up to you, but Van Neumann came up with this idea of a probe that would go to another solar system and then reproduce itself, and then the new one would go to the next solar system and reproduce itself. There's a couple of big drawbacks. Number one, power. So we're going to have to come up with something more than just atomic energy for that to work. But think about a ship that would fly into another solar system. I know I'm going way out there, but fly into another solar system and mine the things it needs to build.
Star Trek to me.
Yeah. And build another ship. And they, just like itself, to go to the next solar system. We kind of throw that off as science fiction, but they said that there's two things: power, the ability to reproduce that and be able to build it, which now with 3D printing is no longer science fiction. I mean, they're talking about in, maybe 50 years that we'll be able to introduce to the printer the atomic structure to put those things together to print like that. And that means printing biological parts.
I was going to say, people who doubt that, people are already working on printing blood vessels. They take some of your cells and they will introduce it into like this flask, and they will give it some sort of blend of like adrenaline and everything to start to create the reproduction process with your own cells. And then they can 3D print that. There are actually videos everywhere. There's,
That's mind blowing.
Yeah. 100%. That actually can pump. There was a working 3D printed heart. Now it wasn't installed into, a person because, legalistic issues, but I mean, functioning, working 3D printed heart. That's identically genetically compatible to the person who needed it.
Isn't that fantastic? And this is what I'm saying, that once we're in heaven, the thing about a von Neumann probe, they need an intelligence that can solve problems. But if you're going to live forever, you could be that intelligence.
Right, kind of gets rid of the need for that element.
Right. And so, from the get-go, as soon as the Lord gives us our body back, gives us, redoes our body, redoes the earth, or however that's going to look in Revelation, it's mind-blowing. So it's hard to grasp. We're already set up.
Yeah,
we're already set up. And that's an exciting thing. One thing in the Old Testament that always boggled my mind, and you guys have heard me say this before, is the Tower of Babel. God said, let's go down and see what they're doing. And this is the thing the Lord says. He says, look at what they can do. When they're together, there's nothing they cannot do. And when we're in heaven, we're all going to be
there's
together.
No politics involved. And
no monetary motivations involved.
It's just pure science. Yeah. I mean, science at its purest form. And we're going to get to go and do that forever. And, you brought up that idea of eternal vacation. God put Adam and Eve in a perfect garden where God would come and walk with them in the evening. And even in that place, God gave them a job, gave them responsibility.
Right.
And that's what we have to look forward to. That in eternity, God's going to be like, go and do.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to get eternity to do that. And I think, Gabe, like you brought up, man, we're going to keep going around circling God's throne and being like, holy, holy, holy crap. This is amazing. You know?
Are you allowed to say crap in heaven?
Maybe there'll be a different language.
Is there poop in heaven?
I don't know. Obviously there is. There's got to be.
Say this is a whole nother podcast.
It is.
Yeah.
Does that exist in heaven? But as we kind of wrap
we need Greg Brennan too.
Yeah, come in and talk about heaven.
Yeah.
We'll get him to do that.
If there's poop in heaven. He'll love it. He'll love it.
Man, we've really devolved here in the last couple minutes. But just that idea that where does science go from here? It goes on into eternity. And as his people, we're going to use science to continue to discover what God is up to, what he has done, and who he is. And that's an exciting thing. And so hopefully, as you've been listening today, you've kind of seen that this whole idea on the war between religion and science, it's a farce. It's fabricated. It doesn't exist. As Christians, we believe in science. Let's be clear about that. We believe in science, and it is a great tool that God has given to humanity to discover him. So guys, as we close, do you have any final thoughts on this topic before we wrap it up?
I think I've emptied my brain on all my thoughts on this subject. So go ahead, Gabe.
Here's a few quick ones. And these are some of the biggest things, again, scientists, often discount God because you can't include him in scientific discovery because he is beyond all of our comprehension. So they say, that God can't possibly exist, or he won't necessarily fit in this scenario. Some scientists say he doesn't exist. And then like Hawking. And then there's others who say like, I don't want to use God because they think of him as a scapegoat because they can't prove something, through scientific measurements that we have. And so that's important to note in terms of, people who say that, religion has destroyed the idea and the progress of science. Look at what Islam did in 1200, or I think it's right around 1200. There was this massive awakening, and they started these massive studies and all that sort of stuff. And that's just religion in general. But then the foundation of Yale and Harvard and all of these colleges along the United States, you know how they were originally founded? These super liberal universities, you know how they were founded? I learned this when I was taking my master's courses. They were founded by like the local churches to educate people, Christians. And they were seminary. Yeah, they all started off as that. And then they started expanding a little more to your general science and math. And so colleges, the most prestigious colleges in the United States, started off as religious organizations to educate people.
We have one right down the road from us.
Oberlin College.
Yeah.
And then so to continue, another big argument that they have is evolution, creationism versus evolution. Who came before Charles Darwin is Gregor Mendel. He's really the father of all of that sort of stuff. And he was a Christian. He was discovering and classifying and ordering God. Who else classified and was organizing animals? Probably Adam. And then guess who else did that? Noah. Mm-hmm. I mean, so look at this and how this world has been created. And, people were really upset with the Hillsong 100 billion times where they said evolving in pursuit of what you said, evolving. And that's like a trigger word for Christians. And I don't think we have to be afraid of it because there's a really great debate if you want it. Ken Ham from Answers in Genesis, he has the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, and Bill Nye, the science guy, they have a debate over evolution. And Ken Ham talks about in the Bible, God talks about making things in their kinds.
Yeah.
We can see, evolution taking place now. It's observable. But what we're saying as Christians is that we didn't start as a single cell amoeba and, work into a fish that grew legs and came into a monkey and now we're here. But we're saying that there was kinds of dogs and dogs have evolved into other dogs.
Right. And so it's that macro evolution versus.
Yes, correct.
Micro.
And so, but that's a big debate that Christians, that's a simple one that a lot of people just haven't done research on. And we get kind of stumped. We're like, well, God made it that way.
But how did he make it that way? That's the real question and where science has gone. I love that you brought that up because everybody, I got to protect the faith. You don't have to protect your faith. You don't. You believe in God and he's going to reveal all this stuff to us. Have faith in that and quit worrying about what everybody else attacks.
If God is not big enough to survive our questions,
right, then
we're all wasting our time.
Right.
We've yet to disprove him yet.
And in fact, the opposite's happening.
Yeah.
How many true scientists who have just looked at the numbers truly out, they come out on the other side of this and they said, man, there's no way this happened by accident.
Yeah. Here's what Mikio Keiko, he's a theoretical physicist in City College in New York. Yeah. And he's one of these developers of the string theory. And he says this. He says, I have concluded that we are in a world made by rules created by an intelligence. Believe me, everything that we call chance today won't make sense anymore. To me, it is clear that we exist in a plan which is governed by rules that were created, shaped by a universal intelligence and not by chance. The final resolution could be that God is a mathematician. The mind of God, we believe, is cosmic music, the music of strings resonating through 11-dimensional hyperspace. This is where science is going. And here's a guy who didn't believe in God, and now he does. Does he believe in the Christian God? No, he doesn't.
Same kind of Einstein thing,
right? But this is these are important discoveries, and in this whole mantra, I believe in science has become just a way to demean other people.
Yeah.
And I think if people would really look, the guy who invented the MRI was a Christian, and he did it to help people. And hospitals and all that science involved all came from Christian communities. So now we're off on another subject. We're supposed to be closing. Come on, get a hold of
Christian people. Yeah.
So there are some incredible Christian scientists out there, and hopefully, like we said, it's kind of broken down that argument for you. This is a thing that, as Christians, we can confidently say we believe in use in our pursuit of discovering God and becoming more and more like His Son. Pastor Tim, you want to pray for us?
I will. Father, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss something that I know is near and dear to your heart. You are the great scientist, and there's so much you want to reveal to us, and you're probably holding us back because we can't be trusted with it. But I know one day, Father, that you're going to let us go, and I'm so excited for that. And I want to thank you for being the great scientist, the great mathematician who made this universe in a way that we can comprehend it and measure it and enjoy it and make all the great creations that you let us make. And Father, I just want to thank you. And Lord, I pray that the people who are listening to this podcast today, that their faith will deepen, and that you will let them know that you don't need to be defended, to believe in you, and you'll walk us through eternity with you and with science. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Midweek Podcast. We'll talk to you soon.